Let's rock and roll. I was ecstatic to learn about your book. I actually learned about it through the Army Historical Foundation, which 25 years ago I worked for when I lived in D.C.
Oh.
And I found out about Fox Connor when I was a senior in college from a professor named Edgar Puryear, who had done a lot of research into military leadership, wrote a couple books. And I'm curious, when and how did you first learn about Fox Connor?
I have a friend, good friend, old college roommate, has made his career in radio broadcasting. And he has a show. He has a call-in show. Has to do that every day. And periodically he needs to go on vacation. And so what he does is call people that he knows to fill in for him. So he asked me to fill in for him. And the date that he actually had asked me to host for was June 6th, which is a Normandy invasion anniversary. So I thought I would try to do something on topic of that. I had seen where there was a new book out at the time, an author named Mark Perry, fabulous book if you have not read it. It's called Partners in Command. Hey, nothing ventured, just like you contacted me, I contacted Mark Perry. And I said, hey, here's who I am, here's what I want to do. Would you come on the show? And he goes, be delighted to. So I thought I owed Mr. Perry the courtesy of trying to read his book in advance of the interview. Unfortunately, I didn't have a chance to read it all. When you do interviews, you frequently read through something. You don't read it page for page, word for word. You read through it. You read things to get a gist of it. And it's funny because I would read, and the book was about, Partners in Command was about the Eisenhower-George Marshall relationship. And every time I'd read through, it was either Connor talking about this guy, Fox Connor, or Marshall talking about this guy, Fox Connor. And so I said, hell, he looks interesting. I'd like to read a book about him. So what I did was got on Amazon, got on Barnes & Noble site, didn't see a book about Fox Connor. So I decided I always wanted to write a book, so he looked like a good place to start, so I started with him.
Huh. That is awesome.
Yeah, that's true.
That is
Mark
fantastic.
Perry. I have him to thank for this. If Mark had told me no and I had gone on to do some other aspect of that radio show, I probably would never have heard of this gentleman, not formed the interest, and you and I wouldn't be speaking today.
So I'm curious. You said you'd always wanted to write a book. Had you considered any other book before this? What spoke to you about this specifically?
I can't say that I did. It's just I grew up reading. My father was a big reader, and we always grew up around books. And it's just been a vague thing that I always wanted to do. And it was just, here's this nascent, just dormant desire I'd always had to do something, and it seems to be an opportunity. Just thought I would give it a shot. It's just always, like I say, I love books, and I always wanted to try to write one. So I got started and just see how far it takes me.
So I'm so curious about that. You're a full-time practicing attorney. How did you go from hearing about this guy, Fox Connor, to saying, I'm going to do this. I'm going to undertake this enormous research effort and then write it and then edit it and revise it and publish it. Tell me about that whole sort of process from thinking about, again, neat idea, maybe want to do this at some point, to I'm going to tackle this.
Yeah, I started small. I started like anybody else would. I Googled and I saw what was out there. And again, most of the Googling was to see if I could find a book on the guy. And honestly, as the information came in, it just, and part of this, honestly, it's not really difficult to do when you're a practicing attorney. The skills are highly complementary, at least in the field that I practice in. I'm a litigation attorney. And so what we do day in, day out is we are confronted with a mass of information, and we need to rapidly uptake the information, sort out what seems useful from what's not, organize that in some manner for later use. Honestly, this kind of became, for me, it was not a chore relative to the practice of law. It was actually very complementary. It became the same fundamental exercise, except something that was perhaps a little bit more interesting to me personally than is the run-of-the-mill legal case. I don't have a very exotic law practice. I deal basically with the defense of truck wrecks. What I do, I represent a lot of trucking companies and insurance companies. But the analytical skills of it are essentially the same, really. And so it really was not anything more than just taking on the work that I would do from during the regular work day, except I would either on the weekend or here and there in the evenings, I would apply it to something that I found very interesting to me personally, and then it all just went from there. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about
It wasn't hard at all. It really was not.
Yeah. So how long did it take you from really getting going until you submitted the sort of final manuscript and you knew it was going to get published? Was a year, 2 years? Yeah. How long did all the research take?
The interview that I did with Mark Perry, I believe, was in the year 2007.
Okay.
So, like, the germ of the idea starts in 2007.
Okay.
And I did a little bit on it and then put it aside for a good long. It was probably around 2010 that I had played with this and played with it, maybe the way you might play with growing a garden here and there. You work on it and then mostly leave it alone. But I had somewhere around then, it could have been, so I was born in 1960. So I think I hit 50 at that time. And it was just like, I'm not getting any younger. Let's try. And so I had at that point in time decided to maybe really start putting ideas into concrete sentences and paragraphs and so forth. So I would say I wrote it in earnest. Now, bearing in mind, this is something that's always been for fun for me. It's not what I do for money.
Yeah.
It's not a money-making thing.
Right.
It's not generates a little bit of income, but trust me, not enough to quit my day job.
Right.
And so I just had fun with it. Fortunately, I had absolutely no pressure to finish it by any time. I was probably done with it. That phase took me probably about 5 years.
Okay.
And then from 2015 to then I got a contract, my final publisher. At that point, there was pressure. At that point, I did need to get it done. But it was, when I agreed to the time frame, I figured I could make it. So that's how that works. So you could say from initial conception to hitting the shelves, 8 or 9 years.
Wow. That's amazing. I want to ask, did writing this biography, this book, did it change your life in any way? And if so, how?
I had fun. Change me? Probably not. I can honestly say, including our chat today, this whole thing has been fun for me. Some fun for some guys is playing golf, and I used to be a big fisherman. Everybody's got a different definition. This whole thing has been a pleasure for me. It's been enjoyable. There's the nanosecond that it ever felt like work, I just stopped. If I didn't feel like doing this anymore, guess what? I just put it aside, didn't deal with it until I was ready to. So, no, I can't say it. By no means. I am very flattered that you reached out to discuss this.
Yeah.
By no means have I achieved any sort of status or stature as a literary figure. Nothing like that. Still, I am today what I was when I started it. A guy raising a family, practicing law, trying to find something that's fun to do in life that you don't get in trouble for. And so that's pretty much, other than just maybe enhancing it and making it a little bit more fun for me.
Yeah.
It's not changed me that
Gotcha.
I'm aware of.
Gotcha. Can we talk about a couple of moments in Fox Connor's life? One of which is, I am so interested in Fox Connor spending, 15 years as a captain. The thought of that today, I'm a Gen Xer, the thought of that today to me is anathema, and I can't, millennials or Gen Z or whatever it's called now, the thought of same title, same rough pay, same rough duties for a decade and a half, just almost boggles the mind. Tell me a little bit, talk to me about that period in Fox Connor's life and how he kept going, how he persevered, and the worth he saw in the work, even though it seemed like he wasn't advancing.
So let's start with that last word, advancement. So advancement means you're moving relative to something else, right? Everyone else around him was in the same boat. None of his contemporaries moved any faster, was where everyone else was. The military was not then like it is now. It was a very small, tiny, fraternal thing. The concept that if you want to be in this as your career, you're going to pay your dues and you're not going to advance in rank wasn't unique to him. He was well with his contemporaries. Point number one. Point number two, even though the rank did not change, if you think about, let me ask you, Russell, did you read the book? Have you had a chance, or did you read, did you do like I did, just read through it?
I've read it like 3 times. So I read it, and then I read deeply to take notes for my essay, and then I did a skim in the week leading up to this. So I've read it.
And I didn't want to presume that you did, because as I say, when I interviewed Mark Perry, I did not.
No, if I didn't love it, I would not be reaching out. I loved it. That's why I reached out.
So if you think about the period that you're talking about, okay, so he didn't advance in rank, but think about how interesting, enjoyable some of the things he did was during that time. He got to go to France. And this is a boy from rural Mississippi. Man, I've been up there. Today, that is the boondocks. You can imagine a century ago. This man got to spend a year living in France, living in Paris. He was sent to and succeeded at these brand new cutting edge educational schools, colleges and schools that the Army had set up to train and to develop its best and brightest. And he was still a captain, but among the captains, again, advancement relative to what? So I think for him, the guy wanted to be a soldier. He didn't want to be anything else. So he wanted to be a soldier. They weren't going to make special rules for him. All the guys his age group were captain. A lot of them didn't make captain. It's like it is right now in the military. You get to the point where there's a ton of lieutenant colonels, and some of them move up or you move out. And Connor, I think, did not view it as something that required perseverance and endurance. I think he would have told you he was advancing very well relative to his peers.
Interesting. Fascinating. I think that whole
and
period
I'm sure I'm forgetting a few postings here and there. Man loved horses, loved to be out. So a posting to Fort Riley, Kansas, where you had a lot of off time as an artillery officer, ride the prairies out there on horses. And I think the guy had a great time.
Yeah. I want to ask about another time in Connor's career. So this is the end of World War I. He is in the Palace of Versailles. He's at the treaty signing ceremony. And I think you do a really nice job of talking about the aura, the atmosphere, the champagne being popped. The Allies are ecstatic. All of this slaughter, all this killing is finally, after years, over. And it's Connor who, seemingly alone, looks at everything going on and looks beyond that and thinks to himself, and then later mentors Eisenhower and Patton and Marshall and others that get ready, because the next World War was basically guaranteed at that signing ceremony. I think it's so remarkable. I remember Edgar Puryear, my teacher, talking about this. That, look, get ready for the next World War. It is coming. I'd love to hear from you. How did he have that insight? How did he look beyond that moment of celebration to fast forward 20, 30 years, that there is something terrible going on right here?
I can only speculate. So what we have on all of that comes from people who are relating what Connor told them. So in my own research, I did not see a diary entry or a letter or anything first person from Connor where I can tell you, oh yes, in a letter to XYZ, he said that. So this is all, it's secondhand. It's coming from what people say he said. Now, I accept that. I think enough people have related it. It seems plausible to me. And I think I do have some insights, speculation, as to why I think that was the case. And I think there's 2 primary factors. So the first one, the United States fought the Germans in that war, but Connor was an admirer of the German military. So before we actually entered the war. So if you look at, again, going back to Connor's formative period, when he's studying at the Staff College at Leavenworth, Kansas, when he's studying at the Army War College, what they are studying are the Germans. What they are studying were the successful method by which the Germans of 1870 had managed to defeat the French in the Franco-Prussian War. All their map exercises were modeled off of that experience. And I could go on and on, but essentially, even during the war, He did not have a hatred for the Germans at all. I think, in fact, because he was in such close quarters with them, I think he probably had as much disdain for the French as he did the Germans. Okay, number one. So he did not have a disdain for the German military, and he admired, the martial skills of the German, empire at that time, number one. Then number two is Connor, in his heart of hearts, had always thought that the war needed to end on German soil. If you go back to some of the where I'm talking about the end of the war, he was busy planning up this big offensive that was going to take place in Lorraine and head toward Metz and capture these coal fields. And a lot of Connor's critics, in fact, I quoted some of those in the book as well. So a lot of Connor's critics were like, yeah, this guy was bummed when it ended. He was having the ball. He was having the time of his life doing all this, and now it's over. Okay? I think Connor thought that the way that, they quit, it's good, but this isn't how it was supposed to have ended. It was supposed to have ended with an actual military defeat in Germany, where their ability to wage war was removed. And I think those two things are as close as I can come, to his idea that, and I guess the other thing was, I think a third factor. He had gathered from his time in the French army. So when he had served that year with the French army, he had seen how France and Germany just had a visceral hatred of each other relative to the Alsace and Lorraine provinces. And I think that he thought that just as the French felt humiliated after 1870, would not forget it, and it would motivate them for revenge, I think he also felt that the Germans would feel humiliated, which they were, and that would motivate them. So I think you put those three together, that's as close as I can come.
Gotcha. Okay.
Am I rambling too much for you?
Yeah, this is awesome. This is incredible. This is awesome. So on point two, what I'm hearing from you is because the war didn't end with a real military victory by the Allies on German soil, the Germans had this psychological sense of like, we didn't really lose. And
I think that's been borne out by history. I think I think Hitler used that to great effect, that they were never beaten.
They were never beaten, right?
That it was Jews and other people that sold them out at Versailles. I think they weren't beaten. Honestly, their system collapsed. Their political system collapsed. Their economic system collapsed. That was multifactorial. The blockade that had been on them for years. But on the battlefield, they could have and should have retreated behind the Ardennes forest, regrouped, wait till the spring, and come back again. Look when they quit. They quit in the middle of November. The winter was about there. Winter was there.
Yeah.
Connor was not alone, by the way, in thinking that this was going to end in 1919. I think he may have been a little bit more disappointed, however, that it didn't end the way he thought it should and would have ended. And that's certainly what his critics said. His critics were not at all kind to him on the thought that he was actually sorry that this was over.
If you look at the totality of World War I, the accomplishments of the German war machine are remarkable. And when the Americans entered the war in April 1917, look what had happened or was about to happen. The Bolshevik Revolution, the Russians were about to get out. And so the Germans could redeploy all of those troops and material and effort to the Western Front. There was a great fear among the Americans that we better get here fast or France is going to collapse before we can do any good. It was remarkable that they held up a two-front war for...
Yeah, and a lot of the credit there goes to the French. They had the good sense, they really had the good sense to put a conciliator, more of a kind of a commander that Eisenhower later became, rather than someone who would dictate to the British, work with the British. This is Marshal Foch. So the French and the British both understood that they had to form an actual alliance rather than just two independent armies fighting at the same time. It is rather remarkable that the Germans did not succeed in 1918 because we were not there in enough force to really... Our presence in stopping the German offensives, we had a role. Can't say we had no role, but we were not the primary reason. The Germans had more men at the end of the day. Their farms could only, they still had to feed these men whether they were fed on the eastern front or the western front. Their factories could only make so many artillery shells and bullets, regardless of which one. And as I said, the collapse in Germany came from within. The political system collapsed, the industrial base collapsed. That blockade that the British had, they strangled them, and it worked. That was as much of a factor in why they just quit. But the Bolshevik agitation in the streets, war weariness, all of that factored in as well.
Yeah. What was your view of General Pershing at the end of your research?
Very skilled commander-in-chief. Pershing, I don't have anything negative to say about Pershing. I think that he was given a massive undertaking with wholly inadequate resources, very vague guidance on how it was he was supposed to accomplish this. Went over there, took charge of the situation, assembled a very talented team around him. Connor was by no means the only one. Held his ground. He conceded points to his allies when he needed to. He held firm when he needed to. I think as a leader of a military over there, I think he did a fine job. I am sure someone can nitpick. I'm sure minds that are much more attuned than I am to military strategy can find countless things. I think you can find countless things Napoleon did wrong if you nitpick it. But on the whole, if you look at what the man was asked to do, what he was given to work with, and what the ultimate accomplishments were, I give him an A. I give him an A+ star. Now, would I necessarily have wanted him for my father-in-law? Probably not. He was a hard man.
Yeah.
But I don't know that you're going to be everybody's best friend and accomplish the mission that he had to accomplish. Not to mention, hell, he was the Secretary of State. He was the head of the Army. He was the American ambassador. He was all of these roles. He had all of these roles that he had to simultaneously take care of.
And he had confusing orders from Congress, and and his boss hated him. Peyton C. March hated him, and he hated Peyton C. March. What an awful, terrible role to be in, and still.
Yeah, and I can totally understand March's position, you know? But it's one of those things, so when a flawed structure is in place and you are asked to function within the flawed structure, whatever that structure may be, what's more important, accomplishment of what you're asked to do or adherence to the rules and regulations of the structure? Now, probably there's a vast majority of the population, maybe me included, would be more the rules say to do X, Y, Z. The procedure says this, that, and this. So I guess we should do it that way, whereas I think Pershing, didn't really take that's what galled March so much, was that Pershing just did it. He didn't ask for March's approval, didn't care what March thought, And as long as they were succeeding, no one was going to remove him. Now, had the Germans not collapsed, had Connor's grand plan to go into Germany and beat them over there, once we do become once we have millions of people over there, and it didn't work then, I'm sure he would have found himself, like most things, few and far between when it comes to friends. But as long as he's on top, bud, friends were easy to find.
Yeah.
And I think Pershing, one thing I've wondered, it was not like in 1920, the man we elected as president was that outstanding of a figure, Warren G. Harding. Okay. I tend to think Pershing would have made a fine president, but he never got off the ground. He wanted it. He was definitely interested in it, but never got off the ground. Have you thought about that? George Washington heads that war, becomes president. Andrew Jackson's the leading figure coming out of 1812, becomes president. Zachary Taylor, leading figure coming out of the Mexican War. Ulysses Grant comes out of the Civil War. Teddy Roosevelt comes out of the Spanish-American War. Dwight Eisenhower comes out. All these guys become president, but not Pershing. And very interesting, and also interesting to think about, would he have made a good president? I don't think he'd have done any worse than Harding, for sure.
It's interesting, those military leaders that didn't get that chance. MacArthur got shot down. He was old at that time. He got shot down. Colin Powell got shot down. He floated the idea a little bit, didn't really take off at all.
I remember poor Powell out there with a Mexican hat on trying to do the Macarena dance.
Yeah.
And he's not cut out for this.
Yeah, right, yeah. Yeah, you had the right job. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? Now, I think Powell passed away recently, but I bet you Powell, sitting in his rocking chairs, thank the good Lord above I did not become president.
I think so. I totally think so, too. I agree.
Yeah. I'm an admirer of his as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Was Connor a religious man? And if so, tell me about that. No?
I don't think he was. Man, none of that comes through any of it. I read he may have gone to church, but I don't think that, I don't believe he identified with any particular religion. He probably went to whatever chapel, to the extent he went at all,
right.
Whatever chaplain was on whatever base, he would probably go to set an example for his men, but
got it.
Not that I know of.
Besides Fox Connor himself, who emerged as the most interesting or intriguing figure in his life?
I'm sorry, give me that one again.
So besides Connor himself, who emerges as the most interesting figure or intriguing figure in his life? Is it his wife? Is it Eisenhower? Is it Marshall? Who else steps out of the shadow with him throughout his life in your research?
Yeah, let's think about that. So I don't know that I'm able to really boil that down to one person. I think his father was a massive influence upon him. I don't think there's any doubt of that. I think that this young fella becomes in a posture to be where he was because of the strength of character of his father and Connor's admiration of him and desire to emulate him. Man, I think his father was a big influence on him. Beyond that, I think that he definitely was influenced by General Pershing in the same manner that he later influenced Eisenhower. I think Marshall, my take on Marshall is that he and Connor were much more friends than they were much more contemporaries. They may have been a rank differential between them. But again, in that Army, that wasn't as maybe defining as it is right now. But he and Marshall, I think, were contemporaries and pals and buddies more so than a clear, I'm the alpha male, you're whatever the opposite of that is. Whereas with Eisenhower, I think that was clearly a mentor-protege type relationship.
Yeah.
I think Connor was very influenced, I think, by his wife and the wife's family.
Yeah.
Military officers at that time, I think he had a sincere fondness, maybe love for his wife, probably. But I think also Army officers tended to make advantageous marriages to women with money. And because they were expected to be in a certain lifestyle, fairly or not. And Connor and his people had no money. These were dirt farmers in 1920s Mississippi, but they had no money. But I do think he and his wife genuinely liked each other. I think she didn't take anything off of him. He didn't take anything off of her. One thing I think is pretty revealing on that is rarely were they apart.
Right.
A lot of people did not take their spouse with them to postings and so forth. But she did. She went with them.
Yeah.
And I think they genuinely enjoyed each other's company.
Yeah.
Those are the figures I think of. That's all I can think of on that. Yeah. Sorry.
No, I agree. I think especially his wife's family, his father-in-law really stood out to me as so wealthy. And I think just have opened up for him a totally different life, an aristocratic New York, northern-based life, very different than his parents, and not morally better, but just a different vista of life.
I think he always, in his heart of heart, viewed himself as a Mississippi boy. Okay, I don't believe in his own self-identification that he ever viewed himself as a New Yorker. He viewed himself as a guy from Mississippi. But when, leaves of absence, when the opportunity for that to occur would arise, he would head up to the Adirondack Mountains and hunt and fish and canoe and all that. Would not head back to the heat and humidity of Mississippi's cotton fields. And hell, I can't blame him. I live in a place very similar. And But no, he did gradually, as time went on, I think particularly once his parents died, he had less and less reason to go down south.
Yeah.
And he went very infrequently.
Right.
I don't believe that any of his many nephews and nieces from his several brothers and sisters, I don't think really any of them knew him to any degree.
Right.
Whereas I'm still in touch with the people in New York who were the nephews and nieces on that, so they're still calling their kids Fox Connor.
Right.
You know, it's Fox Connor this last name,
right.
Fox Connor that last name.
Yeah.
So he definitely became integrated much more into that New York family. You know.
Interesting. I want to ask a few questions about him as a leader and as a mentor, and maybe we could just start. If I want to be a great mentor, what lessons should I take from Fox Connor?
Let me think about that. I would say be yourself, number one. Don't try to be anything different. You can't give somebody what you don't have. That's fundamental. So you can't give someone any sort of attribute that you don't have yourself. So you have to be yourself, number one. I think if you see some potential in someone, have patience. Understand it. Just because and this is again life 101, just because you want something doesn't mean it's going to happen immediately or happen ever, but be yourself, be patient. I think be clear. What is it that you're trying? What is it that you're trying to convey? Don't bury the message in 20 minutes of anecdotes where somebody gets lost in what you're trying to tell them. And I think answer questions. If someone is responsive enough to ask you questions, maybe even challenge the way you think, give that the respect of the consideration. Perhaps they're right. Perhaps whoever it is that you're trying to teach can teach you something. So I think those are the things that pop immediately in mind.
Did you come across anything? We hear about his successes, and there's probably a question in there of, was Eisenhower going to be great, Fox Connor or no Fox Connor? You could probably make an argument either way. But was there anybody that you found where Fox Connor did really try to mentor him, spend time, did the things you just mentioned, and it didn't turn out so well, or the potential just wasn't there? Just we don't hear about that person for whatever reason.
Okay, so some of the folks that were equivalent to Eisenhower, but they didn't pan out.
Yeah, that also came under the influence of Connor, but just for whatever reason, they didn't rise, or the mentoring didn't stick, or whatever.
Yeah, two names come to mind, and let's put that in perspective. If let's become Supreme Allied Theater Commander and President of the United States. If we're making that our measuring stick, well, then no, nobody else.
Yeah, nobody did it.
But I guess to be fair, I can think of one guy in particular that really fulfilled the Eisenhower role. In the interwar period, there was a gentleman, an Army officer named Trimble Brown, and Trimble was aide-de-camp to General Connor. And Connor got him sent to the right schools and did all this with Trimble as well. So Trimble is of command age when the Second World War breaks out. He's a colonel at that point. He was, and I cannot recall, I can't tell you if he was the commander of a regiment or a battalion, but it was one of these that was involved in the early combat experiences in North Africa. We had a very spotty record up until Kasserine Pass. Actually, we had a pretty significant defeat in Kasserine Pass in North Africa. And I can't recall if it was in that action or one that led up to it. But I know that Trimble Brown's unit, whether it was a regiment or a battalion, was seriously outmaneuvered, encircled. I think Trimble got away. A lot of his men were captured, and Trimble didn't see the field again after that. In fact, I could see in the Marshall papers where at this point in late 1942, early 1943, where Connor is writing on Trimble Brown's behalf to Marshall saying, look, just let him come. I think there was some victory's got 1,000 fathers, defeats an orphan. Trimble's unit was overrun. He was under much scrutiny and criticism. And I think Connor intervened to just let him come home. Okay, so I think Trimble Brown would be one, but I'm sure there were many battalion and regimental commanders in the early going who got outmaneuvered and circled and had their forces overrun. But that's one. The other one that kind of pops to mind, the man's name is so distinctive. His name was Xenophon Price. It starts with an X.
Yeah.
Xenophon.
Yeah.
Xenophon Price. Price had been one of Connor's right-hand men in the G3, in the operations section of the ADF General Headquarters. Price was one of Connor's boys. Now, he had gotten to be a major, and after the war, Price was Pershing's kind of chief assistant on the American Battlefield Monuments Commission, which is, you may recall that from the book where Eisenhower served under Price for a little while on this Battle Monuments Commission. And I can remember Eisenhower quoting Price, as saying that, "You mark my word, the men who serve on this commission are destined for great things." So that was Xenophon Price in 1919. When Eisenhower takes over he becomes theater commander in 1942, he runs across the name of Xenophon Price, who is still a major at that point. You move up or you move out. Well, he didn't either. They just kept him as a major for all of that period of time. And Eisenhower at least promoted him to colonel so that he could, get out as a colonel at least. But so there was a guy who I think was definitely, he viewed Connor as a mentor. Connor, and look, and so many of those guys, none of these are household names, but a lot of the people who served with Connor in that G3 section of World War I, a lot of them went on to have major field command roles in the Second World War. And also positions of prominence in the interwar period. But poor old Price, he got stuck at major from, now why, what it was, I didn't take the time to dig into that. But I think those are two.
Yeah, fascinating.
So it's not like Connor, it's not like everyone who worked with Connor necessarily became a superstar. But as I say, if you try to measure people against the Eisenhower standard, then hell, we're all failures.
Exactly. What do you think was Connor's, in his own mind, what was his biggest disappointment or his own sense of failure? If he had any, maybe he didn't have any.
I do think that for a Army officer to really not command forces in actual military combat, I think was a disappointment to him. I know he felt that acutely in the early stages of his career, where he did not he didn't serve in the Cuban campaign, didn't serve in the Philippines. But I do think also he reconciled himself, I think maybe a lot better than, say, George Marshall did. I do think Connor was a devotee of the general staff system. Again, hearkening back to the Germans and the admiration that he had for them. I think he thought that those people were as good as they were in the field, primarily because their general staffs were as good as they were behind the lines. And I think he reconciled himself early on to that. That's his disappointment in not being sent to Cuba and not being sent to the Philippines. That's firsthand. I saw that. I never really saw where he expressed any great disappointment during the First World War that he was not commanding troops. Now, others did, like James Harbert, pestered Pershing incessantly that he could get. I think Connor came to a recognition that he was where he was good, and this is what he's good at. And it's not everybody can be the quarterback, man. We need some good, solid guards here. We need a good tight end, whatever. Pick your sport. Not everybody can be the pitcher. We need a good shortstop here. And I think the man genuinely enjoyed what he did. I do think that he found the period after World War I when you didn't wear military uniforms anymore. You had to wear coat and tie. I think he hated that. I think he hated the emphasis or the marginalization to a degree of the military role. I think he hated that. There's no question he was not good in testimony, hated going to Congress. He hated the Washington, D.C. part of it. So I think if he was, I don't believe this man was disappointed at all that he did not become chief of staff. Perhaps in 1930, perhaps.
Yeah.
Because Douglas MacArthur got it and he and MacArthur didn't get along.
Yeah.
But short of that, man, I think he was extremely happy when they put him riding herd over those civilian conservation corps camps in the 1930s. Man, he could wear his riding boots. He could go on horseback. He could sit down and eat with the guys and everything. I think he loved all that.
Yeah.
So that's about what I can come up with on that for you.
Yeah. What, at a high level, just the last few questions, Steve, and this has been amazing. What lessons do you take away from the life of Fox Connor?
I admire his devotion to his particular profession and calling. I think that sticks out for me. For a lot of those guys, it would have been easy to quit, and a lot did. But I admire his devotion to that. I think it speaks highly of him that he understood his role and did it as best as he could, and wasn't constantly sniping at whoever had other roles. I think he was a great team player. I think it's admirable of him that he did take the time. And look, and going back to one of your earlier things, I don't think it's really debatable that without Fox Connor, you have no Eisenhower. Yeah. Because I think without Fox Connor, this cat gets convicted on a court-martial for fudging on expense reimbursements. I don't believe he comes back from that. The Army at that point in time, they had more officers than they had need for. This would not have been a slap on the wrist. No one knows for sure, like you say, but the fact that he did take interest in someone and help them for no benefit of his own, just to do the right thing, I think that speaks well. So those are the things I take from.
I find him so intriguing that he married in his own career, like the callings of his father and his mother. His dad was a soldier in the Civil War. His mom was a teacher, and he became both of those things.
I believe he did.
Yeah, I think it's very cool.
I think, man, the Connor home in Slate Springs, Mississippi, formed him. But that's probably true for most of us. I think that's probably true for most of us. He was fortunate that he had two very positive, factors that coalesced into his upbringing. Not all of us are that lucky.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think this guy, his parents were teachers, and he was a teacher.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any doubt about that, and I think that's true.
How do you think he evaluated his own life? How did he look back on his own life? How did he evaluate it?
I don't have any. So to be honest, I don't. I have nothing first person where he undertook that exercise. I do have some insight from, I don't know if you happen to remember from that book, but the book ends with Connor fishing on a lake, and he's being rowed around by this young guy who was, World War II had just started. He was waiting to be called up, Sam Black, So here's Connor and Sam Black, old man and a young guy rowing around in a boat, fishing. I don't know if you fish or not, but I've done a lot of fishing. And, you tend not, when you're fishing, you tend to not linger and bring up and things you don't like.
Right.
You tend to make it a nice, pleasant conversation.
Yeah.
Everything has this nice glow about it. Everything has this nice reminiscence about it. And according to Sam, Connor talked about being a soldier. He enjoyed his military career. I think he would have, I see no evidence that he ever graded himself. I think General Connor would have said, all no, from what I had to work with, I did as well as I could do, undoubtedly made some mistakes, undoubtedly zigged when he should have zagged, and so forth and so on. But I got absolutely no inclination from him, from anything that I've ever seen, that he viewed his career as anything but a success, and witnessed that another contemporary of Sam Black's, which was Connor's grandson, a guy named McPherson Connor, who incidentally I met and who turned over all the information, which was really the big unlocking of the treasure chest to get this book written.
Yeah.
Mac goes to West Point.
Yeah.
Mac wanted to be like his grandpa.
Yeah.
And I just think that if you had a guy, if you had a guy who had a career that he was not proud of, I don't think he'd have been talking about it, being rowed around in a boat with one young guy, and I don't think his grandson would have been motivated to go to West Point. That's my speculation.
Yeah. 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 It's the undercurrent of his relationship with his son Tommy, and then Tommy and Mac, was intriguing and interesting too. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think he did a great job on Tommy. Tommy's name was Fox Connor, but there was a reason he called himself Tommy. Tommy was much more a Brandreth. In fact, I think Tommy really did not want to go to West Point. I think, according to Tom, so Mac Connor is Tommy Connor's son, and I think it's pretty clear the military was something that Fox Connor essentially made his son do.
Yeah.
His son wanted to go to MIT and be an engineer and go off and take over the family business and so forth and so on, and that's ultimately what Tommy ended up doing.
That's right. Yeah.
But again, I think it speaks. I don't know that if Connor was displeased with his military career, that he would have been as insisting that his own son go there. But I think that's probably, let me just say this, I sure hope people don't sit here and put a microscope to my own parenting.
Oh, yeah, sure, yeah. No, I agree. I totally agree, yeah.
Tons of things.
Yeah.
We could all point to their shortcomings and all of that, but I don't think he would have been the only man of his time or any other who wanted one thing for his son, with the son wanting something else, and the son ultimately yielding to everyone's regret.
Yeah.
I think that's a story as old as the hills.
Yeah, but I think that's a really interesting point you make, that you see the love of Fox's career in his grandson. That would not have come through. His grandson wouldn't have imbued that if it wasn't sincere in Fox himself.
Yeah, because obviously, and old Tommy did it. I don't even think Tommy made his old hitch. I think Tommy got out of West Point. I'm fairly certain he didn't make 4 years. He got out and went to work, I believe, for RCA, which was a major thing at that time, as radio is wireless communications.
Yeah.
And the guy he went to work for, Harvard, was again one of those inner circles of Harvard. Harvard was probably Pershing's closest right-hand guy, was James G. Harvard, and that's who Tommy went to work for. Yeah, I think it was one of these things. Tommy did it. Tommy hated it. From what Mac told me also, Tommy's wife, which would be Mac's mom, she was not nearly as into it as Bug Connor was, as far as living on these army posts.
Yeah.
No, we're not going to do this.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine my wife saying, "Hey, sweetie, I want to do an Army career. We're going to have to move to Leavenworth, Kansas." That might be the end of the marriage. I wouldn't go over well.
Absolutely.
Last question for you, Steve. What's next? Do you have any more books in you? Was this it? You loved it? You did it?
Well,
you're done? Anything else?
Another. I have been. The truthful answer is, so back then I hit 50. I'm in my 60s now, and I find myself honestly my law practice is still just as busy as it ever was. In fact, it's busier. We're having trouble finding attorneys and paralegals and secretaries, and I mean that's a dying breed. Legal secretaries don't really exist anymore. Anyway, so I find myself with really less time than I did. Certainly, unfortunately, less energy. I just wouldn't have thought that, but I find myself with a little bit less energy in my 60s than I did in my 50s. And so I have been working since probably 2018, on another project. Got a wealth of material. So I've got a ton of material. but I just don't find that I've got the energy and the juice to come home after a day at the office or in the courtroom or wherever and come home and work on this. I find myself more just wanting to sit down and do less cerebral things. And whatever that means, just getting older. But if I could make it work, I think it would be a fine book.
Yeah.
It's one of Connor's contemporaries. He asked the question, who did I run across that really intrigued me from coming out of the whole Connor experience? I forgot the guy I'm working on right now. His name is Malin Craig. Do you remember that name?
Absolutely. The chief of staff before Marshall. Yes.
Yeah.
Malin Craig, yeah.
He's another one. No books. 0 books. No books on Malin Craig.
Yeah.
General Craig's grandchildren are still alive, and they, just like Matt Connor, opened the key, turned over all the stuff to me.
That's amazing.
And there's a great story there. And the flaw there is totally me. I just don't have the energy that I once had, and that's better or for worse. I don't know exactly how much longer I'm going to work. I have no plans to retire. I still plan to write that Malin Craig book if somebody beats me to it. Tip of the cap to him, because I had my shot, bud, and I just didn't get it done.
Yeah.
But no, I do think certainly if I ever slack off at work, if I ever scale back a bit, I know a lot of folks when they ponder retirement, well, what am I going to do with myself? How will I apply I really don't think that'll be my problem. I've got that book that really the assembled parts, the raw material is there. It is everything that you see of the level of research and documentation and all that. And people contact me on a fairly regular basis about this Fox Connor book and favorably upon the degree of factual data.
Yeah.
This Malin Craig project's the same. I just have to make it work.
Yeah.
And then the other book I'd like to write, depending on how much time the good Lord gives me. So I live down here in Louisiana, and down in these parts anyway, one famous thing that all guys my age anyway and older grew up knowing about was something called the Louisiana Maneuvers of 1941.
Oh, yeah.
And so that period of 1940 to 1941, the book I'm writing on Craig will end in 1939. It's going to end when Marshall takes over in 1939. But man, 1940 and 1941, massive story there. The thing is, I think a lot of that story's been told. I don't think the Louisiana Maneuvers have been written about properly. If I happen to be blessed with a lot of longevity, that would probably be book number 3.
That'd be amazing.
Now, I can't get book number 2 done. Hey, I'm like Fox Connor, bud. The mission ahead of me is handle files. It's not necessarily quit and go write history books for a living. I'm not done being a lawyer yet.
When you finish the Malin Craig book, I will definitely read it. That sounds amazing. I'd love to learn more about him. I'd love to learn more about him.
I'm quite flattered.
Yeah.
That is crazy. You know, like a guy like Connor and a guy like Craig, the reason there really was no book and the reason that a guy like me gets to write that book, you can't write that book if you're writing books for a living.
Yeah.
You can't. There's no way. You just cannot write those books because you can't do the research and you can't turn it around in time to meet the kind of deadline, nor do books like that have any sort of mass appeal. There seem to be of great interest to military history aficionados.
Yeah.
But when you look at people who make a living writing books, few and far between, and so it has to be somebody who takes it on as a project.
Yeah.
To get these done.
Yeah.
So.
Well, Steve, this has been amazing. I appreciate it so much. This has been great. I'll transcribe this, and then do you mind if I just send it to you to look at, or do you want me to roll with it? What do you prefer?
That'd be fine. That would be fine, Russell. And let me say I'm very flattered. One of the things that makes, as I told you, this has all been for fun for me. And one of the things that keeps it fun is it's gratifying. So for the guy on my end that I wrote that, I didn't know if anybody would like it.
It's amazing.
So it's gratifying to me that you take the time from your weekend to chat with me about it. I'm always, I got as much out of this as, if not more than you did. So I thank you.
So when I had this idea around this time last year of this series of articles that I'm calling silver medalists, people who had great careers, great lives, but maybe they weren't Steve Jobs, they're not Caesar, they're not Alexander. I think there's so many important lessons to be learned from folks like that. And the first person that I thought of from my years with Puryear was Fox Connor. I'm like, this is the perfect exemplar of the silver medalist. He basically was the acting chief of staff under John L. Hines. He missed out on it a couple times. He was the deputy chief of staff. He was a great mentor to all these great leaders. He was Pershing's right-hand guy. Like, what a great exemplar. And that's, even being a silver medalist is incredibly high to aim for. And I just find so many valuable lessons that we can learn from people like this.
You may find something of use for your purposes in that little handout that I sent you.
No, I love it, yeah.
Basically, there's an organization called the Military Order of the World Wars. Basically, it's a group of military officers. And those guys have me come speak once a year to some high school ROTC students.
Okay.
And so I developed this little, so that little program is geared toward the protege. And what we do is we go through and we talk about I tell them the Connor, Eisenhower in Panama story from the standpoint of being Eisenhower. You know, what can you do? Not necessarily from the standpoint of being Connor, being the person who's imparting the information. What can you be if you're the young guy who needs some guidance? And of course, that's the level that we're talking to at high school ROTC. But you may find something of value. I know the people that attend that it's well attended every year. I've been doing it probably for 5, 6 years now. And those big men, their parents contact me. So you may find something of use for your own purposes.
Oh, yeah.
You're welcome to any or all of it. I hereby grant you, permission to use any of it that you would like to use.
Yeah. Steve, again, thank you so much for your time. I'm so grateful. Uncle, thanks for listening in on us.
I had muted mine, so I wouldn't do anything to interfere with the interview. I want to tell you, I came away with as much as probably both of you all did as well.
I'm glad. What area of the law do you practice in, Raymond?
I was in litigation for 41 years.
Okay.
And probably the bulk of that was more appellate practice, but the law firm, similar to how you described your practice, we did defense work. We did a significant amount for insurance companies. We did a lot of products liability and things along that line, some trucking cases, but not nearly of the magnitude that your practice includes. So I did it for about 41 or 42 years.
Good for you, man. You understand there's really not a major shift to go from just the massive intake of disorganized information to put that into a coherent trial presentation or an appeal brief presentation. The skill is essentially the same.
Yeah, I think the tactics, the strategy, there are clearly similarities.
Yeah, absolutely. Gentlemen, it was a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Steve. This has been great. Thank you so much.
Further service, don't hesitate to call.
All right. Thanks again, Steve. I appreciate it. Thanks, Unc.
See you.
Bye, y'all.
Nice meeting you guys.
Bye-bye.
Recording stop.